Writing. Burglars slipped into the CEO's house, right as the single dad came to return his resume. The front door was already open. Expensive glass lay shattered across the marble floor. A frightened little girl hid silently behind a staircase, clutching her teddy bear with trembling hands. Upstairs, heavy footsteps echoed through the luxurious mansion while masked burglars searched room after room for valuables. At that exact moment, a worn-out single father carrying nothing but an old envelope containing his resume stepped onto the front porch, hoping only to return something that did not belong to him. He had no idea that within the next few minutes, his ordinary act of honesty would completely change not only his own future but the lives of everyone inside that house. Before we begin this unforgettable story, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who still believes in kindness, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire if you believe that one honest decision can change an entire life. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that goodness still exists. The bright morning sun stretched across the quiet neighborhood, reflecting off elegant homes surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens. Among those expensive houses stood the magnificent residence of billionaire CEO Victor Ashford, a man admired for building one of the country's largest technology companies. Newspapers described him as brilliant but distant. Employees respected him, but very few truly knew the weight he carried behind his calm expression. Since losing his wife several years earlier, Victor had devoted nearly every waking hour to work while trying his best to raise his young daughter, Hazel, whose cheerful smile had slowly faded under the loneliness of growing up without her mother. Several miles away, another father was beginning his day under completely different circumstances. His name was Elias Mercer. Unlike Victor, Elias lived in a tiny rented apartment with his 8-year-old son, Owen. Their home was small enough that the kitchen, dining area, and living room blended into one cramped space. Every morning before school, Elias carefully packed Owen's lunch with whatever food he could afford, pretending not to notice when his own stomach remained empty. Losing his factory job months earlier had pushed him into a desperate search for employment. Every interview ended with another polite rejection. Every unpaid bill added another sleepless night. The previous afternoon, Elias had attended an interview at Victor Ashford's company. He knew the chances of being selected were almost impossible. Hundreds of applicants competed for a single administrative position. Still, he had shown up wearing his only suit, one that had been carefully stitched together after years of wear. The interview had gone reasonably well, but while leaving the office building, Elias accidentally picked up the wrong envelope from the reception desk. Only after reaching home did he realize the mistake. Inside was another applicant's confidential resume and recommendation letters. He could have ignored it. Nobody would likely know. But honesty had always been the one possession poverty could never take from him. Early the next morning, Elias decided to personally return the misplaced envelope before continuing his search for work. When he reached the corporate headquarters, he learned that the CEO was working remotely from home due to a private family matter. The receptionist suggested delivering the envelope directly to Victor's residence because it contained sensitive information needed for an important hiring meeting later that day. Although nervous about approaching such an influential businessman, Elias accepted the address and boarded 2 buses across the city. As he approached the mansion, everything seemed strangely quiet. The large security gate stood slightly open. A luxury SUV sat abandoned in the driveway with its driver's door left wide open. Elias hesitated. Something felt terribly wrong. Then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking inside the house. Most people would have turned around and called the police from a safe distance. Elias reached for his phone, dialed emergency services, and quietly explained what he believed was happening. The dispatcher instructed him to stay away until officers arrived. He wanted to obey. He truly did. But then another sound froze his heart. It was not another crash. It was the frightened cry of a child. Without thinking about danger, Elias rushed through the open front door. Inside, the elegant home had become a scene of chaos. Drawers had been ripped apart. Paintings hung crookedly from walls. Decorative vases lay shattered across polished floors. While carefully moving through the hallway, Elias noticed little Hazel crouching behind the staircase, tears silently streaming down her face as she desperately tried not to make a sound. The young girl looked directly at him with eyes filled with terror. Elias gently motioned for her to remain quiet before carefully guiding her toward the back entrance. But upstairs, one of the burglars heard movement. Heavy footsteps thundered down the staircase. Elias quickly hid Hazel inside a nearby pantry and quietly closed the door before stepping into the hallway himself, drawing the intruder's attention away from the child. The masked man demanded to know who he was. Elias had no weapon, no training, and no plan. His only advantage was determination. As another burglar appeared from a nearby room carrying expensive jewelry, Elias knocked over a heavy decorative table, blocking the narrow hallway long enough to create confusion. The loud crash echoed throughout the mansion just as distant police sirens began approaching. The burglars panicked. One attempted to flee through the rear entrance while another rushed toward the front door carrying stolen valuables. Elias chased neither. His only concern was Hazel. He immediately returned to the pantry and gently reassured the terrified little girl that help was coming. Only after police officers stormed the property did he finally allow himself to breathe. Victor Ashford arrived minutes later after receiving frantic calls from his security company. The moment he saw Hazel safely wrapped in a police blanket, he fell to his knees, overwhelmed with relief. She ran into his arms crying harder than she had since losing her mother. Officers explained that an unknown visitor had risked his own life protecting the child while delaying the burglars until law enforcement arrived. Victor searched the crowd until his eyes met the exhausted man sitting quietly on the front steps, holding nothing except a slightly wrinkled envelope. When asked why he had entered the house despite the danger, Elias simply handed over the envelope and explained that he had only come to return a résumé that had accidentally ended up in his possession. Saving Hazel had never been part of his plan. Leaving a frightened child behind simply had not been an option. The officers themselves seemed astonished. In an age where many feared becoming involved, a struggling stranger with every reason to think only about his own problems had chosen compassion instead. Victor quietly invited Elias inside after the police completed their investigation. While workers cleaned broken glass and investigators documented evidence, the two fathers sat across from each other in the damaged living room. Victor learned about Owen, the mounting bills, the endless job rejections, and the quiet sacrifices that filled every day of Elias's life. He also realized something that no interview could ever reveal. Resumes listed education and experience. They could never measure character. A few days later, Elias received an unexpected phone call. He assumed it would be another rejection. Instead, Victor personally offered him not only the administrative position but a leadership role within the company's community outreach department. Victor explained that businesses could teach technical skills, but integrity, courage, and compassion were qualities that could never be trained. The salary transformed Elias's life almost immediately. For the first time in months, Owen watched his father come home smiling instead of hiding unpaid bills beneath old newspapers. They moved into a modest but comfortable apartment where Owen finally had his own bedroom. School lunches no longer depended on discounts, and bedtime stories were no longer interrupted by worries about eviction. But the greatest change happened inside Victor's own home. Hazel refused to forget the man who had protected her. Over time, Elias and Owen became regular visitors. Weekend lunches slowly replaced lonely afternoons. The once silent mansion gradually filled with children's laughter again. Victor realized that success meant little if it could not be shared with people who reminded him what truly mattered. Inspired by Elias's example, Victor launched a foundation dedicated to helping unemployed single parents rebuild their careers. Hundreds of families received job training, childcare assistance, and employment opportunities that gave them a second chance. Every graduation ceremony reminded Victor that one honest stranger carrying an ordinary envelope had unknowingly inspired extraordinary change. Years later, reporters often asked Victor what the greatest investment of his career had been. Many expected him to mention a billion-dollar acquisition or groundbreaking technology. Instead, he smiled and pointed toward the foundation filled with parents rebuilding their lives. He would quietly explain that the greatest investment he ever made began with trusting the character of a man who arrived at his front door carrying someone else's resume instead of his own dreams. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Single Dad Empire, share it with your family and friends, and leave a comment below. Stories like these remind us that kindness is never wasted, and your support allows these messages of hope to reach people who may need them most. Special request, comment, kindness always finds a way, if you believe honesty and courage can still change lives. As the sun set over the city that evening, two fathers stood together watching their children laugh in a peaceful garden that had once witnessed fear and uncertainty. Neither wealth nor poverty had defined who they truly were. One possessed money but longed for hope. The other possessed almost nothing except integrity, yet that single quality became more valuable than every treasure the burglars had tried to steal. Sometimes destiny does not knock loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried inside a worn envelope by someone who refuses to stop doing the right thing, even when life has given them every reason to give up. And in the end, the greatest reward was never the job, the salary, or the recognition. It was the discovery that a single act of courage could restore faith, heal broken hearts, and prove that even on the darkest morning, kindness still has the power to change the world forever.